Good evening, I'm Leo Garcia.
And I'm Gavin Moskowitz. Welcome to Colonial News Network, bringing you live coverage from the year 1767.
Tonight we have breaking news from across the American colonies as tensions with Great Britain reaches a boiling point over the new controversial tax law.
That's right, Leo. The British Parliament has just passed the Stamp Act, and colonists from Massachusetts to Georgia are expressing outrage over what many are calling taxation without representation.
In tonight's broadcast, we'll examine the details of this new law, explore the colonial response, and speak with witnesses on ground who have seen these protests firsthand. Now, onto the Stamp Act.
Let's start with the facts, Leo. The Stamp Act, which Parliament approved earlier this year, requires all colonists to purchase specifically stamped paper from a wide range of items: documents, newspapers, pamphlets, legal papers, licenses, and even playing cards.
But this isn't only about buying paper, Gavin. This represents the first time Britain has directly taxed goods and services within the American colonies. Previously, taxes were only imposed on imported goods coming from outside the colonies.
Exactly right, Leo. And the purpose behind this tax? Britain's trying to raise revenue to pay off massive debts from the French and Indian War, as well as other expensive European conflicts that have drained the royal treasury.
The British government argues that since the colonies benefit from protection during the French and Indian War, they should help pay for it. But colonists see this very differently.
Indeed they do. The colonial reaction has been swift, organized, and fierce. Let me tell you about a group that's making headlines across the colonies: the Sons of Liberty.
So Gavin, who exactly are the Sons of Liberty?
This secret resistance organization was founded by the Boston political activist Samuel Adams, a name we'll likely be hearing much more from in the future. In the coming years, the Sons of Liberty have chapters forming in the cities throughout the colonies.
So what methods do they actually use for their protesting?
Well, Leo, their tactics have been controversial, but quite effective. They've been harassing customs workers and stamp agents, but the officials responsible for enforcing this new tax, and they've intimidated royal governors and organized public demonstrations.
We've received reports that in some cities, stamp agents have been burned down, their homes have been vandalized, and they have been resigned from their position for their own safety because of the hatred of the colonists.
That's correct. Just last week in Boston, angry colonists destroyed the home of Lieutenant Governor Thomas Hutchinson. While some colonial leaders have condemned the violence, many others see it as a justified resistance to tyranny. Now let's move on to the Stamp Act, Congress, Leo.
The resistance doesn't just stop at the street protests, Gavin. Political leaders are also taking action. Tell us more about the Stamp Congress.
This is a historic development, Leo. In October, representatives from 9 colonies gathered in New York City for what's being called the Stamp Act Congress. This may be the first time the colonies have come together in such a unified way.
Wait, that's cool to know, Gavin. But what actually came out of this Congress?
Well, Leo, they made a bold declaration that the colonies cannot be taxed without representation in Parliament. Think about that for a moment. Colonial leaders are directly challenging Parliament's authority over them.
The Congress also drafted the Declaration of Rights and Grievances, a formal document often outlining colonial objection to the taxation policy. In it, they assert that British subjects, they have the same rights as those living in England.
And one of those rights, they argue, is that only their own elected colonial assemblies have the power to tax them, not a distant parliament in London where they have no voice. Now on to the economic boycott.
This is perhaps one of the most powerful weapons that the colonists have employed in this economy.
Absolutely tootly fruitily, Leo. Colonial merchants have organized a widespread boycott of British goods. They're refusing to import or sell British products until Parliament repeals the Stamp Act.
Yeah, and it's not only the merchants. Women throughout the colonies have joined in what they're calling the spinning bees. Gathering together, they produce homespun clothes rather than just buying them from the British. And they're also boycotting the British tea and other luxurious items, which is saving them money and paying the British and making it so they don't have to pay the British the money they don't deserve.
Yeah, those dirty Brits. It's not just merchants. Women throughout the that's weird. The economic impact is already being felt across the Atlantic. British merchants are losing substantial amounts of money, and they're putting pressure on Parliament to reverse course. Some reports suggest British trade has declined by as much as 40% in some markets.
What can I say, Gavin? Money talks. Gavin. And right now, it's speaking loudly against the Stamp Act.
We're now going to hear from our colonial correspondent who's been witnessing these protests firsthand. Leo, can you share what you've observed in the stress?
Thank you, Gavin. I've been in Boston, New York, and Philadelphia over the past several weeks. I can tell you the atmosphere is absolutely electric. Every port, city, you can feel the tension rising and the determination.
What have these protests looked like?
There's been crowds of hundreds and even thousands of people gathering in town squares. They're hanging and changing signs, screaming liberty, property, no stamps, and burning down. And they're burning down stamps, papers, in bonfires. In some cases, they have completely destroyed their companies. And people are leaving their company because their fear of safety.
That's remarkable. And what are the ordinary colonists saying?
I spoke to the merchants, artisans, lawyers, and even some laborers. There is a common thread in their argument. They believe that they set dangerous precedents. If Parliament can impose these taxes, what is to stop them from taxing anything and everything in the colonies?
Quite the slippery slope argument.
Precisely. One Boston lawyer told me, today it's stamps, tomorrow it could be a tax on their land,
Down with the stamps!
their homes, and even the air we breathe.
Get rid of the
This is
stamps!
generally feared that they don't resist
You stupid
and
red
that,
coat,
they'll,
off the back!
and that they'll lose all control over their own affairs. Now onto our expert analysis on this subject.
To understand what this means for the future, Leo, we need to look at the bigger picture. The conflict is really about the fundamental questions of governance and rights.
That is completely right, Gavin. The core question is, can Parliament tax the colonies? Do colonists have the same rights as British citizens living in England?
Colonial leaders argue that because they have no representation in Parliament, that body has no right to tax them directly. It's the principle of no taxation without representation, a phrase that has been repeated in town halls, taverns, and newspapers throughout all 13 colonies.
I completely agree with you, Gavin, but there's another layer to this. Some British officials suggest virtual representation, the idea that members of Parliament represent all British subjects, not just the ones who elect them.
Colonists reject this argument completely, Leo. They say that virtual representation is no representation at all. How can someone thousands of miles away, who doesn't know their circumstances or concerns, truly represent their interests?
Oh, it's a philosophical It's a philosophical divide that may be impossible to bridge. The British see the colonists as subjects who owe debenance to Parliament. Many colonists are beginning to see themselves beginning to see themselves as free people who consent to be governed, not subjects to be ruled. So Gavin, what actually happens next?
Our sources indicate that the colonial boycott is having significant effect on the British trade.
That is absolutely, indubitably correct, Gavin. Some members of Parliament are reportedly reconsidering their position. British merchants are flooding Parliament with petitions begging them to repeal the act before they've driven into bankruptcy.
However, there is a complication. Even if Parliament does repeal the Stamp Act, and sources suggest they might, there's talk that they may simultaneously pass something called a declaratory act.
Now, why would they do that?
It would assert Parliament's right to make laws for the colonies in all cases whatsoever. In other words, they would repeal this specific tax while remaining their claim to absolute authority over colonies.
So even if the colonies win this battle, the war over authority continues?
See, and that could mean this conflict is far from over. Colonial leaders like Samuel Adams have proven they're organized, coordinated across colonial boundaries, and willing to resist policies they view as unjust. And what are the broader implications, Leo?
Gavin, what strikes me the most about this crisis is how it's changed the relationship between Britain and America.
How so, Leo?
For generations, these colonies have been proud British subjects. They've defended them. They've defended the empire, fought its wars, prospered under its protection. But this tax has made many question if the Parliament is truly interested in their heart or just their money.
You're right. I've heard colonists say that they feel like second-class subjects, expected to obey and pay, but not given the rights and representation that British citizens in England enjoy.
And there's also something else. These protests have brought colonists together in unprecedented ways. People from Massachusetts and Georgia, who previously thought themselves mainly as Virginians or New Yorkers, are now seeing themselves as Americans with common interests.
That's quite a significant shift, Leo. The Stamp Act Congress was the first time most of these colonies have formally cooperated on a political issue. They've learned they can work together, organize together, and resist together.
And that's the lesson that won't be forgotten, regardless of who is in this immediate crisis resolves. Alright. And that's a lesson that won't be forgotten regardless of how this immediate crisis resolves itself. Now on to our final thoughts about this topic of broadcast.
The question on everyone's mind tonight, is this temporary decree overtaxing or the beginning of something much larger? Only time will tell.
We'll continue to monitor this developing story and bring you updates as events unfold. One thing is certain, the relationship between Great Britain and her American colonies will never be quite the same.
Will Parliament repeal the Stamp Act? Will colonists accept any compromise that preserves parliamentary action? And if this crisis passes, what happens the next time Britain attempts to tax the colonies?
These are questions that will completely shape the future of this continent and everyone who lives here.
We want to thank you for joining us tonight for this special report. For Colonial News Network, I'm Gavin Moskowitz.
And I'm Leo Garcia. Stay informed, stay engaged,
So,
and good night.